The power of little virtues in Salesian spirituality. My dear friends, today we reflect on the impact of little virtues. In a world that often celebrates big achievements, dramatic gestures, and spectacular success, St. Francis says gently reminds us that holiness is found in small, quiet, everyday acts of love. These little virtues, like gentleness, humility, patience, simplicity, and joyful optimism, may appear insignificant at first, but when practiced faithfully, they transform hearts, relationships, and communities. They remind us that holiness is not reserved for the extraordinary, but is woven into the ordinary fabric of daily life. The first point for reflection today is holiness for everyone. St. Francis de Sales was revolutionary in his vision. At a time when holiness was often thought to belong only to monks, nuns, or priests, he boldly proclaimed, holiness is for all. Housewives, soldiers, farmers, teachers, parents, students, all are called to union with God. This universal call means that we do not need to wait for grand opportunities. Our pathway to holiness lies right where we are, through daily patience, kindness in conversation, forgiveness in small conflicts, and perseverance in our duties. Salesian spirituality, therefore, is practical, down to earth, and deeply human. The second point for reflection today is what are little virtues? Let us ask, what exactly are these little virtues? They are small hidden acts of goodness that shape our character. A gentle word to someone in distress, a patient ear to a friend, a humble acceptance of our faults, or a cheerful smile offered to a stranger. St. Francis Sales insisted that heroic gestures are not the main road to sanctity. Instead, holiness grows through ordinary fidelity, small virtues practiced with consistency. They are little because they are ordinary, but they are powerful because they steadily mold us into the likeness of Christ. Let us look at some of the little virtues according to St. Francis de Sales. First of all, the virtue of gentleness. The first and perhaps most famous Salesian virtue is gentleness. St. Francis de Sales was called the gentleman saint, not because he was weak, but because he was strong in love. Gentleness is not passivity, it is strength under control, capable of calming anger, softening hearts, and fostering peace. When St. Francis de Sales corrected someone, he did so with such kindness that the correction became easier to receive. In our own lives, gentleness should guide our words and actions. It invites us to persuade rather than force, to listen rather than dominate, and to heal rather than wound. Secondly, the virtue of humility. Another cornerstone of Salesian life is humility. Humility does not mean thinking poorly of ourselves. It means recognizing that everything good in us is a gift from God. True humility accepts our imperfections without discouragement, while also respecting dignity of others. St. Francis de Sales taught that humility is the soil in which all virtues grow. Without it, even our good deeds risk being poisoned by pride. In practice, humility allows us to say, I was wrong, forgive me. It allows us to serve quietly without seeking recognition. It gives us freedom to depend on God instead of our own strength. Thirdly, the virtue of patience. How often do we struggle with patience with others, with ourselves, and even with God? For St. Francis de Sales, patience was a form of self-possession, a way of keeping peace within ourselves even when life is difficult. He urged us to trust God's timing, to accept trials calmly, and to transform suffering into an opportunity for growth. Patience helps us to bear daily frustrations, the long queue, the harsh word, the slow progress in our spiritual life. Without patience, love grows cold. With patience, love endures. Fourthly, the virtue of simplicity. Simplicity is another little virtue dear to St. Francis de Sales. It means living without unnecessary complications, being authentic, transparent, and free from duplicity. A simple person speaks honestly, acts sincerely, and lives without pretense. Such simplicity brings joy because it allows us to rest in God rather than in appearances. St. Francis de Sales himself was brilliant and cultured, yet he explained deep truths with simplicity, making holiness accessible to everyone. Fifthly, optimism and joy, the Salesian smile. Finally, we come to joy and optimism. For St. Francis de Sales, cheerfulness was essential. It reflects a deep trust in God's providence. Salesian optimism does not deny life's difficulties. Instead, it sees every trial through the lens of God's love. It says, God is with us. Therefore, all will be well. Such optimism creates a joyful atmosphere that lifts others, especially the young, and fosters hope even in suffering. The third point for our reflection today is how to practice little virtues daily. Now the question arises, how do we cultivate these virtues in our everyday lives? St. Francis de Sales gives us simple tools. First of all, begin each day with intention. Before starting, decide to practice one or two virtues consciously. Secondly, examine yourself daily. At night, reflect briefly. Where was I gentle, patient, or humble? Where did I fail? Thirdly, embrace your vocation. Whatever your role, parent, teacher, student, priest, see it as the very place where holiness is built. Fourthly, live Jesus. Let Jesus be the model of your thoughts, words, and actions. Fifthly, avoid scrupulosity. St. Francis de Sales said, practice virtues grosso modo in a broad, calm, and trusting way without anxiety or perfectionism. The fourth point for reflection today is the big impact of small virtues. My dear friends, you may wonder, can such little virtues really change the world? The answer is yes. A gentle word can heal a broken relationship. A humble act can inspire others to serve. A joyful smile can brighten a weary heart. Over time, these small acts build a culture of kindness, respect, and mutual support. In the words of St. Francis de Sales, it is not always in your power to do important things. Sufficient are the small things that offer themselves every hour of the day, but do them with devotion and love. The fifth point for reflection today is overcoming challenges. Of course, the path is not easy. Distractions, temptations, and discouragement often make us stumble. Society may even mock humility or simplicity. Yet, St. Francis de Sales urges us to persevere with courage. He reminds us that God's grace is always available. Even our failures, if faced humbly, can become steps toward growth. The important thing is never to give up. Begin again and again and again. To conclude, living the Salesian way. In conclusion, Salesian spirituality is not about extraordinary feats, but about ordinary love lived extraordinarily well. The little virtues like gentleness, humility, patience, simplicity, joy, etc., are small seeds that grow into holiness. If we commit to these virtues, we will transform ourselves, our families, our communities, and indeed the world. So let us begin today. Let us strive to be gentle in our words, humble in our service, patient in our trials, simple in our hearts, and joyful in our outlook. Let us remember always the Salesian motto, Live Jesus. For in living Jesus, even the smallest acts of love shine with eternal value. Live Jesus.